the record would do the work, but oh well, I'm learning. You all are teaching me great things, gifts. Thank you so much. We are recording. From Susan Clark to everyone. We are recording. Okay. All right. Well, here we go. Again, thanks everyone for coming out this evening, participating in this discussion, critiques of capitalism. A special thank you to Dr. Welch. Sharon, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us and to be part of this ongoing discussion. Let me just suggest a couple of things. We'll move in the following manner, if it's okay with you all. We'll have a description of B corporations, social enterprise, and their significance in this moment of history. Then we'll proceed by an example of what it means in practice. And PAC is going to participate in that part of the discussion for us. And then we'll go back to Sharon, who will talk about restorative justice, businesses, and systemic racism. And then from that, we'll open up the floor for questions. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you know me, there are no bad questions. All questions have a way of stirring more conversation, more reflection, more thought. So please feel very free to engage in dialogue. I think we should begin. Are there any preliminary questions or statements? All right, Dr. Welch, we're in your hands.
Thank you, Dr. Dawson. And I have to tell you all, I am so thrilled, and I want to thank you again for having this opportunity, because I think we are at, and I don't say this kind of thing lightly, a really unique moment in history where there's an awareness of how incredibly wrong, extractive, and exploitive capitalism is, and how it's related to racial justice going back for centuries, and how it has to be addressed. And we have more solutions to different ways of performing economy than I think were ever possible before. And what makes me feel so excited about this particular conversation is that where I became aware of all the alternatives to extractive and exploitative capitalism was in Columbia, Missouri, and from working with all of you. And so I'm going to lay these things out. And so, Kevin, there is going to be a test, but it's going to be the kind of test, not based on if you've read what I've written, but what you see going on, what you see as the alternatives, what you're doing, what other people are doing to really live out now communities of belonging rather than belongings. Now this term comes from Robin Wall Kimmerer, and I don't know if any of you know her work, but I highly recommend everyone read Robin Wall Kimmerer. She's from the Potawatomi Nation. She's a botanist, and she talks about what it means to have an economy where it is really grounded in belonging to the natural world, belonging to each other, rather than a kind of shallow consumerism of belongings, which is emptiness that doesn't fulfill any of us. And as you all well know, not only it's dangerous to certain members of the human race, if we keep following capitalism as it exists now, humans will be extinct. And we will take out millions of species with us, but this form of short-term, exploitative, extractive capitalism cannot work. We know it's over, and we have to find new ways of doing it. And what I think is so incredible is that, and I'm sure many of you are already part of this, and I'm going to lay out the kind of international perspective of what it means of moving out of extractive, exploitive capitalism to economies of belonging. And I'm going to describe it, the international B Corporation, social enterprise. And then I'm going to turn to Pat, who's going to describe what's happening both within Colombia with his business, as well as nationally within the United States. I'll then move into, as Dr. Dawson said, about how this relates to restorative justice and reparations, and then open it up to all of you. Because what's really been amazing me is like every time I've given presentations on this, people have realized that, oh my goodness, there is something going on that they know about businesses that are trying to do this. They know there are nonprofits. There is a new world being created, and I wager that every single one of you is part of it already, and that together, once we're aware of the ways we're a part of it together already, we can do more to build on this momentum. So first, one of the things that I want to describe is the solutions. Okay, so the solutions that we have, a lot of people are realizing that as humans, if we don't change how we're relating to the natural world, we're going to become extinct. And so we find people who are living new ways of producing food, building homes, providing essential services, and doing it in a way that embodies fully respect for other people and respect for the natural world. And one of the groups that has really been doing this, and they've really been building on this since the 1990s, and I'm not sure how many of you are aware of them, but is benefit corporations. And what I really love about benefit corporations is these are businesses that they've changed, they have a triple bottom line. It's people, planet, profit. And profit is last. And to be a B corporation, you have to legally change your certification because capitalism is sick, folks. You have to put shareholders first, short-term profit. And if you don't do that, your shareholders could sue you. So if you really want to be ecologically, environmentally responsible, if you don't want to screw your workers, you have to have a different kind of certification. I mean, some of it's nuts, but it's real. But so B corporations exist. They're certified where it doesn't have to be just profit and shareholders. And this is one of the things that I love about the B corporation is they have in it, and they phrased it in a way, I don't know if you can see it here, a declaration of interdependence. All right, relates to our Declaration of Independence. So this is the B Corporation Declaration, not of independence, of interdependence. Here it goes. We envision a global economy that uses business as a force for good. This economy is comprised of a new type of corporation, the B Corporation, which is purpose-driven and creates benefits for all stakeholders, not just shareholders. As B corporations and leaders of this emerging economy, we believe, here we go, that we must be the change we seek in the world, that all business ought to be conducted as if people and place mattered, that through their products, practices, and profits, businesses should aspire to do no harm and benefit all, and to do so requires that we act with the understanding that we are each dependent upon one another and thus responsible for each other and future generations. Now, what I love about this community of B corporations is realizing that you can't just make this kind of declaration that you're going to do something else, but realizing that, that could just be greenwashing. You could just be saying that and trying to get people who want to buy it because they think it's a good thing. And so what's required to be a B corporation is rigorous third-party certification. And once you're certified as a B corporation, it's not just once. You have to be certified. It has to be repeated over several years of making sure that you're not just saying that you're meeting these goals, but that you are actually meeting them. And I think that it's really important that they're aware of people could use this as a way of, just kind of saying they're making changes, but really not. Secondly, one of the things that I really love about the B Corporation movement is the way they have both really strong external critique and internal critique. I loved the statement that this was made by the founders of the B Corporation right after those awful elections in November 2016. So in February 2017, they sent an open letter to business leaders. Okay, and this is what they said we have to look at. It says, in the current environment, and this is after, again, what we all know happened in November 2016, in the current environment of rising insecurity, fear, hate speech, and violence, and in the absence of trust in our economic system, all business leaders have an unprecedented responsibility and opportunity to build a more inclusive society. And at this moment, we call on all business leaders to do things. First, in this chaotic moment, to stand up and to speak out together and unequivocally when we see injustice, hate, and the violence we produce. Second, to take concrete action in our own businesses to create an inclusive economy that is equitable and creates opportunity for all for the long term. So again, saying businesses have to stand up to the racism and the exploitation and the homophobia that was unleashed in the November 2016 election. And then also being critical of themselves. And that's another thing that I find really helpful and promising about big corporations. One of the things that I was impressed by is like the group that does the certification for B corporations. They're not just critical of people on the outside. They released a report last year where they had looked at, they really pushed to be certified as a B corporation, you have to be racially inclusive. And so they were looking at themselves that they are in terms of numbers, but they found that for them, the group that does the certification, that the people of color who worked for them had significantly lower levels of job satisfaction as people who were white. And they said, okay, folks, there is something wrong. We have to address how while we've gotten the numbers, we don't have genuine inclusion, and we have to address that. So this is a moment that's looking at, it's a moment and it's a movement, ongoing critique and innovation. And one of the things that I want to ground this in, both globally and then turn it over to PAC, is it's a lot of the work builds on the things, and I found about these two feminist economists when I was at the University of Missouri, and some of you may know their work, J.K. Gibson Brown. It's two women, they've been writing together as a single persona since the early 90s. And one of the things that they talk about is so important, they started doing this in 1992, is saying it's really easy to criticize capitalism. What's harder is to discover a new form of economy. And this is why I thought was so amazing. They were saying it's as hard for workers to live in a new form of economy as it is for owners. Since we really don't know how to live well in an economy that has plenitude for all rather than just ongoing creation of income and wealth. And so what does it mean to do something new? And so they said the first thing is we need to move toward, and they said, practical curiosity as opposed to moral certainty about alternatives to capitalism. So of course capitalism has to be replaced. Now we need practical curiosity about what's going to replace it. And so what they pose is that in replacing it, these are the basic questions that need to be answered, and that they're answered in different ways by corporations, social enterprises, by worker-owned cooperatives. But here are the basic questions. What is really necessary to personal and social survival? So we're talking about the long haul. We're not talking about economy with short-term gain and humans are going to be extinct. Survival, personal and social survival. Secondly, how is social surplus appropriated and distributed? Okay, so is it just a minimum wage, a living wage? What about profit sharing? What about bonuses? What happens with a surplus? What does it mean? And so this thing is how a social surplus is to be distributed and consumed. I mean, one of the things that y'all might know, and I can't do the math well enough, I saw the thing of where Bezos, while he only takes a salary of $83,000 a year, his wealth is he makes like $2,000 a second. Okay, So if that social surplus was fairly distributed among the 750,000 Amazon workers, some of you have your calculators to do the math for me. See what it is, okay? And what that would mean. I think it'd be a lot more than making $15 an hour. And then the last thing that is so important, how a commons is produced and sustained. The commons, the air we breathe, the water we drink, the ground that sustains us. How is the commons produced? Now, one of the things that is so important in doing all of this, and this is where one of the things that I learned also when I was at the University of Missouri, which what I thought was so grateful, is that in moving toward community economies based on belonging rather than belongings, having moral curiosity, it's not just enough to know what's wrong with capitalism from the outside. We need to look at what is it in all of us that feeds that extractive and exploitative capitalism. I learned this lesson basically from working with Carol Lee Sanchez. And if any of you have got the chance to work with her, she lived in Sedalia, Missouri, but she taught with me in a lot of my classes. She's from Laguna Pueblo, and she's an activist and an artist. And she made the point that we have this illusion that Native Americans are intrinsically better at being in harmony with the natural world. And she just said, no, I mean, the opposite is the case. The difference is the reason why many Native Americans are in harmony with the natural world is they remember how they screwed it up. I mean, they screwed it up with overhunting, with overgrazing, and they tell stories, these trickster things, so that they check themselves in the patterns that can lead to living out of harmony in a way that's not in balance with the natural and social world. And Robin Walt Kimmerer does the same thing in her work. Oh, and I so highly recommend that everyone read her work, Braiding Sweetgrass, because she talks about, and I think this is so critical, is how important it is, and this is central to the Potawatomi people, and she offers this as a gift to all of us, is that we be aware of our tendency to be a Wendigo. And a Wendigo is the name of a creature who cares only about their own survival, and not only do they only care about their own survival, they really enjoy taking things away from other people and seeing them suffer. And that this happens, especially when there's times of crisis and shortage. And what I think is so interesting about Kimmerer is like she sees this Wendigo not just in European and Euro-American capitalism, which of course that's there. That's what the theft was, and that's what manifest destiny is. But she says that it's also there in Native American peoples themselves. And this is what's key too. She says the threat of the Wendigo never goes away, but you always have to be there to check it. And rather than choosing self-interested greed and belongings, choose reciprocity, belongings, living in harmony with other people and with the natural world. Now, I want to kind of conclude before I turn it over to Pat, where I began. We're in a growing crisis. We're seeing the magnitude of the social and environmental cost of capitalism that exists now, but also positive alternatives. And what I think is so fascinating is that the B Corporation world, they have one unifying goal, and this is really big. It's not to mainly be an alternative form of economy. They want to completely replace capitalism. The goal is to fundamentally reshape, and not just the United States, the global economic order. This is a quote, to a shared and durable, this is key, shared and durable prosperity for all, including nature and all people. Now, right now, what's interesting with the B Corporation movement, currently there are 3,358 B Corporations, and maybe soon there's going to be 3,359. And on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Pat and Hannah to join as she sees fit, because they're applying to be a B corporation.
Pat, we need you to turn your mic on, please. We still can't hear you, Pac. You're still muted.
Oh,
There you are. All right.
I was trying to unmute somebody else's microphone. Sorry. Thank you, Sharon. Very, very comprehensive setup of the situation. And Hannah Hallwell is one of the best decisions I made was to hire her on a couple of years ago. And because of Hannah and Sharon had been to some social enterprise conferences, one of them in Nashville, and Hannah came back just really fired up about the prospect of becoming a B corporation. So I guess it was almost a year ago, we started the process of applying for B Corp certification. And you may actually see this, it's a nice little logo, it's a B with a circle around it. You may actually see it on some businesses that you frequent. I can testify it's not an easy process. There's several stages that we go through. We went through the first stage, and we haven't qualified yet. We're about 10 points shy of being certified. So there's issues. They look deeply into your business from governance. What does your employee manual look like? What's your ratio of the lowest paid employee to the highest? Where are your suppliers located, and are they represented? Are you using suppliers that are from underrepresented populations? What is your sustainability strategy? Very, very detailed process, and in doing so, we've learned so much and made some really good decisions about the direction that our company has been going. And as Sharon mentioned, there are lots of examples of an alternative approach to being in community together and being in commons. I was thinking, Sharon, when you mentioned, who do we have locally just in our church? And the first name that comes to mind is Mel West. He's been a social entrepreneur. He perfected it long before it was even a phrase or a buzzword. I had him speak at 1 Million Cups, which is a local entrepreneur gathering, to talk about social entrepreneurship. And he came with this list. It was so impressive, a 2-page list of all the enterprises, so the social good enterprises that he's started and then stepped away from, and they're all still functioning. So we all know about the personal mobility and Festival of Sharing. A lot of members of our community are involved in Festival of Sharing, making that happen. So there are plenty of examples locally. Even if I don't know if any of you, he was the director of KOPN for a few years ago, Sean Spence. He has started during COVID, while being in lockdown. He's among the disabled community. He's been challenged by MS for quite a number of years. He started a virtual telethon business. It's now networking folks all over the country, all over the world to raise money for local organizations. So they got it going just in a few weeks, and it's so these are just a couple of the things that we know about in Columbia. I wanted to, as I was thinking about this, I was listening to was actually preparing some shipments of our product and listening to James Baldwin being interviewed by Nikki Giovanni. And I want to share you a couple of quotes. He came with this, one of the most amazing critiques of capitalism I think I've ever heard. Just blew my mind. They were talking about, basically he was saying, you know, white people say they're white. We're not obliged to believe them. People say they're Christian. We're not obliged to believe them. And Nikki goes, well, it depends on, and she goes, yeah, they may say that God exists, but we're not obliged to believe them. And Baldwin said, well, it depends on what you mean by God. And he said, you know, God, you were told that God is our responsibility. And Nikki goes, no, there's 300 billion of us and one of him. And he goes, yeah. And Baldwin, then the next thing Baldwin said was, we are God's responsibility, because if we don't make it, God doesn't make it. And the same is true for capitalism. We are capital's responsibility. But the myth is it's reversed. You know, we're taught that it's the absolute reverse. And we're made to feel like we're responsible for capitalism, for capital. However, as an entrepreneur, what I've experienced is that capital is chasing me. Capital is desperate to have me take on capital to give it value, because otherwise, without enterprises that actually create value, capital has no meaning. But we're taught that the situation is actually the reverse. So if we can get our head around that, we don't have to serve capital. Capital is there to serve us. It should serve the commons. It should serve belonging. That's just shifted my whole worldview from that just within the last hour. So, Hannah, did you want to add any more about what it's been like, the details about applying for a B Corp? And then I just want to say a little bit about the Zebra Network, but.
No, I think you pretty much explained it. I was really pleased to see just how rigorous of a process it was, and how long it took, and how detailed all of our records have to be. And I just want to mention that one of the reasons why we haven't passed is because we're too small. And even though we have all these big ideas that we want to have, you know, measures in place to track all of our emissions, all of the, you know, all of this data that we just don't have the capability of tracking yet. We plan to, but because we plan to and we don't do it yet, we don't get the points for those measures. So there are a lot of like policies. I think Peck touched on this a little bit, but like an employee handbook, we didn't have one because I was the only employee and I'm his daughter. So, but there are lots of policies that we're now like, oh, we can go ahead and write all this out. And the sooner we can get that stuff done, the better we'll be in the long run anyway. So.
Yep. And along the process, we got invited to be part of, as a founder, I was invited to this network called the Zebra Network, and they had this conference called the DazzleCon because a group of zebras is a dazzle. Didn't know. So and the whole notion of zebras is a counter to the unicorn notion within the entrepreneur world, that, you know, what you have to do is try to reach $1 billion valuation to be an Uber or to be an Airbnb, and that's what the venture capital wants. However, and Facebook's proud of their motto of move fast and break things. So for zebras, the zebra is a real animal. It's black and white, and it creates value. It makes things. It's not, you know, it's not a fanciful unicorn. And unicorns are actually very, very rare, even in the financial world. And they're a drain on economies, as many of us have experienced. So, and so it's primarily women of color, entrepreneurs that have found they've been left out of the funding networks. And it was the most amazing conference, that hearing the stories of all the creative alternative ways to fund enterprise and all the really good projects that are being done. So there's the B Corp world, and then there's the Zebra Network, and then there's other networks that I'm sure exist that I don't, I haven't even heard of yet. So the world is shifting. That's the good news, is that capital is desperate. It's desperately chasing places to find meaning and purpose for itself. And we are the source of meaning and purpose. And so we can just, the most fun I had this year was saying no to Shark Tank. Most people see Shark Tank approaching you as an opportunity. And for us, it was just a signal. It's like, oh, good, we're visible that level. But we said, no thanks. And it was a really, really good decision. So that's it for us. Anything else, Hannah?
Great. Well, and I'd like to build on that, because what I think is so, and again, I said this before, but to reiterate it, this is really an interesting moment in a chance for social change. And there might have been some like these before, but I don't know, because on the one hand, we've got this really clear sense of what is fundamentally broken in our society in terms of police violence, in terms of extractive, exploitive capitalism, and people on the streets demanding real change. And yet we have people who've been working for decades trying to make that very change. So B corporations, the Zebra Network, the other group that I mentioned, the Social Enterprise Alliance, that's small businesses, they're not corporations. And what Social Enterprise is working on now, and it's not fully in place, but also a third-party certification that you can't call yourself a social enterprise and saying you're doing the triple bottom line, a people, planet, profit, unless you can prove it. And they're taking as their goals the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And so we've got people who know there's really something else that needs to happen. And what I think is so incredible, because of the protests that have happened after George Floyd and the other murders of innocent people, realizing what is so wrong, businesses stepping up, and also stepping up where they don't want to just be, again, window dressing and greenwashing. So the thing that I shared with Dr. Dawson for you to read, and I don't know if you were able to look at it or not, but the thing where this was from the B Corporation saying, how can businesses work against systemic racism? And they're really this isn't just social media post. They said, how can you really work? And the main thing that they say is essential is reckoning. Every single business look at, and this is a quote, what if we hold a mirror to ourselves and recognize where and how our own work, brands, and businesses have perpetuated structural racism? And this is grounded in the work of restorative justice in South Africa. And another quote, to heal, we must first fully acknowledge the harm. And so businesses really looking at the way in which they have been part of systemic racism and the way they're going to move forward. Another group that's trying to do that, it's the ANA AIM. It's America's marketers, media companies, agencies, production companies. Again, major commitment to doing all of this work. And so I think the challenge that we have now is realizing that there are people who are really interested in doing seriously the work of reparations. One of the things that I do in my classes, I teach a class at the Unitarian Universalist Theological School, and I've taught at the Humanist Association. and other groups as well, is on building communities to counter white nationalism. And one of the things is that we look at, and 3 books that are really essential, is kind of getting at the history of systemic racism and the extreme violence that goes along with it. And all of you might have read these, and if you haven't already, I highly recommend them. One of them that's really important is Edward Baptist, The Half Has Never Been Told, American Capitalism and Slavery. And so what's so important about that book is that the whole things are just the fact that you can have collateral when you make loans. That first collateral is black bodies. And so that whole creation of a market system of loans was based on enslavement, on slavery. Also, Baptist talks about the incredible cruelty where deliberately families were ripped apart because people could work. They'd work harder if they didn't have their children with them or people that they loved. And that was central to it. Another book that's also equally essential is, white women were just as bad as white men. They were her property. Stephanie Jones Rogers, and talking about the role of white women and what was so sick, like white women at the time of slavery, the way they could escape being controlled by the men in their lives was by they were slave owners themselves. And also one of the things that came out is that quite often they were even more cruel physically and violently than men. So white women as much. And so wrestling with that. And then some of you might have known her when she was at the University of Missouri, Carol Anderson, White Rage. And so how after the Civil War, the white resistance to when there was black achievement, trying to bring that back. And so what's so important is to reckon with this both systemic and also impossibly cruel interpersonal violence. And one of the people that I've been working with, and some of you might have worked with her when she was at the University of Missouri, is, did any of you have a chance of working with Helen Neville? She was in African American Studies in the psychology department, and she's now at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And she's put together this framework, and this is all for people of color. And if you want this, I can send it to Dr. Dawson. It's called Radical Hope in Revolting Times. And radical hope in revolting times, and for people of color, she's looking at what it counts for radical hope is a sense of ancestral pride. Well, and I've been talking with Helen, and of course, for those of us who are white, I mean, it's not just ancestral pride. We've got to have ancestral reckoning. What are our wendigos? What is this white supremacy? What is this extractive, exploitive wendigo of just wanting things for our own self that can so easily be unleashed and can cause such grave damage? And so how do we create a sense of belonging? And this gets back to learning from Carolee Sanchez, from Noller Kimmerer, that we consistently affirm our best of wanting to belong to a larger whole, but never forget and never again that worst can still emerge. One of the things I'd like to conclude with is what I think is very interesting, is how important the things that's stated in the statement from the B corporations is, and this is a quote from J. Cone Gilbert, who's one of the founders of this, who's doing this work as certified B corporations. Quote, this old system, existing capitalism, does not value our humanity, but a new system is being born. This new system will help us live into our full potential as human beings. But for this to happen, it's very important that we be just not socially responsible, but socially accountable. And it's not only people like B Corporation that's trying to do this. One of the things I found so surprising, I came across this work. I grew up with the Farmers Bureau, the Farmers Union. Well, even the Farmers Bureau is saying we need to be socially accountable. The Farmers Bureau is looking at fundamental racism in the practice of agriculture in the United States, not just the Farmers Union. And so there's a sense of being socially accountable. And then a quote, in practice, the path to reconciliation is an ongoing process that may never be finished. And that's exactly the key. I think Kimmerer and Sanchez are right. We'll never defeat the wendigo, but we can contain that wendigo. of extractive and exploitative capitalism, and we can immerse ourselves in communities of belonging rather than belongings. And now, here's the test for all of you. Where do you see people who are really trying to live into communities of belonging? And where do you see in institutions with work, businesses that are really wanting to do the real work of reparations? They're really looking at systemic racism and its cost and saying, we're not just going to move into a post-racial society. We're going to build into something better. But to get to something better, we have to be accountable for all the wrong that's been done. And where do you see that happening in Colombia? Where do you see that happening in the United States? Where do you see that happening in the world?
Ladies and gentlemen, we are open to discussion. Do you see it? Go, Jeff. Yes, Jeff.
Hey, so one thing that I got involved with is the Sharp End Entrepreneurial Development Corporation, or SEED. And I think that is a baby step towards making the capital that small minority and women-owned businesses don't have access to available to them. They take donations. So through the Community Foundation of Central Missouri, you can donate to their seed fund, and then they award grants to small businesses started by women and minorities. So it's kind of trying, taking those baby steps towards like leveling the field. And then I had a question.
Please.
Do you know anything about the idea of a circular economy?
Pac?
The donut economy?
Well, probably.
Yeah. So the donut economy comes from an economist. She's in Britain, and it's been getting lots and lots of traction globally. There's I just got her book recently. So it's basically thinking of economy as a donut, so that the planet and our environment and communities in the center. And if I'm not going to describe it well, but anyway, she challenges the whole notion of agency that most economists have been immersed in, so that our purpose, the purpose of an economy, is to sustain community. So think about the commons in the center, and as your economic behavior moves outside to put too much stress on community and planet, then its value, you just lower the value and the support of any of those activities. There it is.
Yeah, here it is. And and I just got it as well too. And one of the things is that I haven't read it, and I don't know if others have you will, but also it's getting at the thing which is really core, which is completely redefining economic success, where it's not just more money by any means. Right. It's not growth, national product. It's not short term. It's what is real plenitude, long-term survival for all. And I'm not sure if any of those have read it. I don't know if she explicitly grounds this in indigenous wisdom or not. Knowing that this is what indigenous peoples in the United States and Africa, well, in the Americas and Africa, that's what they learned the hard way. All right, so this isn't having to be invented. Now, it's going back to an ancient wisdom of, and again, the basic thing which I learned from Carol Lee Sanchez, all my relations, we are really part of a larger whole, and to focus just on, more and more money, short-term survival eventually will kill us too. So.
Pac, I've got a question for you. I take it you still don't have an employee manual yet?
We're working on one.
Okay, well, I'm going to share the manual I have for my one-person business. Occasionally I have an employee, my name is Lyle, if anybody doesn't know that, but here's the most important thing in the whole manual, okay? disagree with Lyle, especially disagree with him when he's full of shit. That's the most important thing in my manual, okay?
Hannah practices that regularly.
I seriously encourage people that work for me to disagree with me, and I promise to listen to their opinions. But I'm going to share the rest of it with you offline, because some of the people that have worked for me have like, this is great. You know, some of it's nuts, but you know, it worked for, you know, what I was doing. So
Send it straight to Hannah.
Okay, great. Yeah, she can use it. All right.
So one of the things I've been thinking about and listening to the conversation, by the way, thank you, you all. Thank you, Hannah. I know you're not a big one for getting in front of folks and talking, so thank you very much. I appreciate that. In a different kind of context, but I think really similar, Pablo Freire, remember, in Pedagogy of the Oppressed, talk about that there has to be a re-education. Have we as a society become so indoctrinated that it's going to take a massive paradigm shift to get people to start thinking about belonging and not belongings? Because we've been so indoctrinated by thinking that our worth, our value, etc., is grounded in that. A practical kind of easy joke is when you go to a party, what's the first thing people ask you? What do you do? and they make value judgments based upon that. What do you all think it will take for such a paradigmatic shift to take place so that we can move in alternative ways to capitalism?
Well, I'm so glad you asked that, Dr. Dawson, because that paradigmatic shift is already happening. We're in the full, it's going on all over the country, and it's going on at the University of Missouri, and the University of Missouri is one of the places that's helping lead it. And one of the things that's so interesting is some of you might have read the book by Paul Hawken called Blessed Unrest. And it came out maybe, I don't know, 5, 6, 10 years ago. And he's looking at a different economy that's based on primarily environmental responsibility.
Right.
And he was saying, he says, no, we're in this, there is this huge paradigm shift, and it's happening all over the world. And it's explicitly drawing on indigenous wisdom, but we don't necessarily see it because it doesn't have a single leader. So it doesn't get the news coverage, but he says it's as big as the Industrial Revolution. In many ways, it's an undoing of the Industrial Revolution. It's all over the world. It's trying, people, I'll get it in a minute and I'll show you if you haven't seen it. His book, Drawdown, you can look at the website. It's people all over the world finding environmentally sustainable ways of having, producing food, of creating buildings, of keeping things going. In another place where this is going on in a huge way, and it's a pedagogy, and the University of Missouri is part of it, and it's in the United States and throughout the world. There's this whole movement called Engagement Scholarship Consortium, and these are universities that they've changed their mission to not just being teaching and research, but teaching, research, mutually beneficial community engagement. And MU is part of this. And I've been going to these conferences, and they're there. And the whole thing is, it's not coming in as the white savior fixing things. It's what is mutually beneficial community engagement. And they're trying to change this where it's a kind of a sense of like service learning, but on steroids. And so, for example, Penn State is one of the leaders in it. And I've worked with some of the people there. And their goal is to have every single student, they've got 90,000 students, do this kind of constructive community engagement, because they find there's something like working with people to have community gardens, sustainable energy supplies, and using this in kind of partnership is so much more rewarding than just, having a gold-plated toilet and more money. In fact, one of the things that was interesting is I was talking to some of the people. I was giving a lecture at SMU, Southern Methodist University. And Southern Methodist University, it is, okay, I mean, it's a school for white rich kids. I mean, you know, that's basically who comes there, you know, in terms of fraternities and sororities. And they have a really strong community engagement process. And what they find and again, one of the colleagues there, Maria Dixon Hall, who got her doctorate at MU, she's director of diversity at SMU. And what she did, I don't know if it was her first or second sabbatical, but something might have worked with Maria. What she did, she didn't write a book. She created a coffee shop that hired people who were formerly incarcerated, right? And it was part of the thing. And she's director of diversity. And when I was speaking there, I was talking to the chaplain, and he said what they find is that these kids who come from these really rich families, they get involved in doing this real work with people, not for people. And they find it so incredibly fulfilling that they want to find ways they can make that their life's mission. Like you were saying, Pat, they don't want to just feed this capitalist machine. And it reminds me of, you know, you mentioned Pablo Freire. It reminds me of one of the core insights from the Theology of Liberation. So this is Gustavo Gutierrez. I think this was written in 1971. It was published in English in 1973. And I believe in my heart this is true. Gustavo Gutierrez said that the theology of liberation frees the oppressor from their exploitation and marginalization. The theology of liberation, frees the oppressed. Frees the oppressed from their exploitation and marginalization. The theology of liberation frees the oppressor from their isolation, their alienation, and their arrogance. And that paradigm shift is happening. And I warrant that every one of you is already a part of it. And you're not alone.
Very good. Very good. Questions, ladies and gentlemen? While you're gathering your thoughts for questions, let me, Dr. Welch talked about everybody else's book, so let me talk about hers. And it's After the Protests Are Heard, Enacting Civic Engagement and Social Transformation. It's by New York University Press, January 2019. I strongly encourage you all to pick up a copy. I read the introduction 4 times. I'm still thinking about things. But I want to encourage you all to please pick that up for your own personal libraries. So any questions, ladies and gentlemen? Any thoughts?
Yeah.
Go ahead, John.
Thanks. I guess what's been on my mind is I wonder what Sharon's take on this is, perhaps Pax as well. A whole lot of stuff has happened since January 2019 when the book was published. And, you know, one thing, as far as it seems to me that one thing is happening is that the capitalist labor market has taken a real battering in the last few months. The workers who were already most marginalized are more marginalized, and you know, it's a lot. It was, I guess, if I have the word right, it was a softer labor market in 2019, even though there were all sorts of cruelties in it. And now it's become a really harsh labor market for people who want to find work within the framework of the capitalist economy. And in addition to which, I guess we all know that those folks who are students are often find themselves not able to find work, but deeply in debt.
Right.
And so, I mean, to me, the big question is there a potential for, and what would it take to create new farms to make it possible for the folks for whom the labor market just doesn't work anymore to find their way into a different economic system. And I guess I'd ask Sharon, do you think that that the institutions and trends that you see are able to respond to that, and what would it take?
Yeah. Oh, John, I'm so glad you asked that, and I would think in terms of, I think this is a real opportunity, and there are some people who are responding saying, it's kind of like, what's the metaphor you want to use? It's ripped off the Band-Aid, the curtain has been, we call these people essential workers, and we see how poorly they're treated. I mean, it just shows how fundamentally broken our system is. And there are people who are really trying to respond to it in really crucial ways. One of the things that I found very important is that I love being in a state that really is taking this seriously. And Tony Preckwinkle, who's the Cook County Commissioner, who, by the way, lifelong Unitarian Universalist. I interviewed her for my book, and she's a student of history. And before she'd started reading, and she taught high school history before she went into politics. African American. She's really been concerned about the way the economic development in Chicago leaves out the Black and brown communities, and white already. But she'd been reading things about the Spanish pandemic. She started reading that in December. And so when this happened, and she has a whole plan from rapid response to equitable recovery, and precisely what does it take to use this as an opportunity. And this is a plan that goes until 2022 that really addresses fundamental economic inequalities and racial inequalities and what those mean. And what's really key, if y'all haven't read it, I highly recommend it, is Pale Rider by Laura Spinning, about the Spanish flu. And what I found so interesting in reading that is that the effects of that pandemic were so transformative and really negative as well as positive ways. And I didn't realize this. Like, she makes the case. And John, and I think what you're asking for, this is a chance that we can finally do the same thing. She was saying that it wasn't until the Spanish flu, that pandemic, that Gandhi really got a foothold in India. He'd been trying to get people involved in the grassroots, and he didn't have it. And when people saw how badly the British government responded, he was finally beginning to build in the change that, of course, it's decades later that it really comes to fruition, but it's still, that was the significant thing. Now, on the other side, she lays out the way that the Spanish flu, it really fed a kind of eugenics and racial caste system in South Africa and for Nazi Germany. And we can see both of those at work in our society right now. And which one wins? It's up to us, folks, and how creative we are and how disciplined. And do we use this as a time to really bring ourselves together for something new? Because there are, and I'm sure you're all aware of it, that there are a few people who are trying to use it to bring about, reinforce our worst.
I have.
Yes, please.
Yeah, there's this book that I've been reading, The Unsettlers. I don't know if you guys have read it, but it's really good. So it's called In Search of the Good Life in Today's America, and part of it is set in Missouri. And so he quotes Gandhi, and he says, Gandhi insisted that India had not been conquered by Britain's might, but seduced by its promises of leisure and comfort. The English have degraded us, warped our nature, and reduced us to dust, not from wickedness nor force of arms, but by quiet gnawing of trade and civilization. India's conquest was not an invasion by a people, but the operation of a trading company. So the solution was to deprive these merchants of their profits by refusing their products. The greatest direct action of the Indian freedom movement, the Salt March, was not a call for revolution, but an insistence that instead of being forced to buy salt from the British, Indians should be allowed to harvest it from the ocean. So he led that. And so, I mean, this whole part about Gandhi is just fascinating. And it's all about just a revolt against capitalism. Right. And that's actually what the book is about. But anyway. Oh, yeah.
Tell us the book again.
It's called The Unsettlers by Mark Sunday.
All right. Very good. Thank you.
You know, that is so fascinating because I had never heard that before. But that, you know, relates to what you were saying, Pac, about that's what was so unsettling about the British conquest, that it was this illusion of a kind of economy. Wow. The creation of a different one. That's bad. Yeah, I'm going to check that out. Thank you.
I wanted to ask a question about how we find out about companies that are trying, or that are like Pac's company, that are trying to become corporations. It is a rigorous process and sometimes could take a year or more. And when I looked on the directory online, there's 3 B corporations in Missouri, in the whole state, at least according to the web search that I was able to get. And I mean, I would love to be able to focus my personal purchasing and any kind of contractual. I mean, we just got solar panels, and again, there's Noller that's a corporation. It's in St. Louis. But I'd like to direct my economic activities towards those corporations that are at least that's on the radar for them, and they're trying to make strides to do that. Is there any way to find that out?
You know, one of the things I think in asking that, and I'll turn it over to Pac and Hannah, is, and I'm glad you mentioned that, Kevin, because that's one of the main things. Like, and I love this, was even the New York Times, you know, on July 4th, it was saying that everything that we do as consumers and investors, do that work and try to find it. Now, if they're already a certified B corporation, it's done for you. Yeah. But if not, you've got to really push. You've got to ask questions. What would the two of you suggest in terms of like sorting through like businesses and how the way they market themselves, or what questions to ask would be helpful? Because of course you know that's where you want to spend your money and invest your time.
Yeah, I don't know if there's I don't know if you could find a directory of businesses that are in the process or pending applications or anything like that. But one of the things that we hear all the time from our customers is that they truly appreciate how transparent we are about our values, and that we pay our workers a living wage, and that we're vocal about that on social media and on our website. And, you know, we're pushing that message all the time. So even though we don't have the certification to back it up, they're at least hearing from us and seeing that from us on social media. But they have to find us first and then look at our website and look at our messaging to figure that out. So I don't know.
Yeah, and I know it listed for a while, and they took it down. There was a thing called a social impact app, and it was like people's social entrepreneurships. Wherever you went, you could get an app. You could see what business. And they took it down because they realized they didn't have any certification, and people could just put themselves on it and even work. Yeah. So that's something that's in the works. But what you're saying makes it so clear that needs to be there where you can look it up. Yeah.
Let me tell you a little story about us and how your impact is even if you're not a customer, even if you're just a prospect. Hannah and I were at a yoga festival. We were vending, and these yogis came by and looked at our chairs, and one of our chairs was upholstered in leather. And they said, "Why are you doing it in leather?" You know, and I said, "Well, we've had customers that ask, and you know, we want it because," and they just said, "We just want to know you care," you know. And our reaction, I mean, we don't offer leather anymore. So we can share with you the set of questions. We can give you some of the questions as a candidate. We can give you the questions that we get asked by the B Corp process, and you can start asking those of anybody that you are considering doing business with, because it does make a difference. We listen to the kind of questions our customer. It's because of the questions they've asked that we now have products in bamboo. We're not doing leather. where we found eco-wise wool, because of, inquiries from customers. So you have a big impact as a customer. Even if you never, I mean, the women who called us out about the leather, they never bought a soul seat, but we've changed.
Yeah. Thanks, Pat.
I don't know if you all have had a chance to look at your chat, but Lyle gave us the numbers, Sharon. It's $84,096 per Amazon employee if he would have shared.
Per year.
A year.
So that would have been the average wage if you'd have shared it. I think I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think in most parts in the United States that would count as a living wage. I think 84,000.
Yeah, I think you're right.
He wouldn't have to,
I'll take it.
Wouldn't have to take anymore.
Let's see. From say your last name for me. Is it Bosseller?
Close enough. Boseller. Yeah.
Boseller says that we also should think about community gardens and the sharing in the sharing economy. You want to say some more about that?
Well, I mean, I just think that urban agriculture is probably one of the strongest sources of action that we can take today. Against green, the problem of transportation with food. And I mean, there's so many things that urban agriculture does for us. So.
Yeah, I agree. Back in the day of the dinosaur, when I was in Detroit, we found that there were lots of vacant lots because of absentee landlords, and the roof of the facility we had a very large facility. We were able to do urban farming there, and it made a real difference because I was there around 85, 83, and as you know, there were no jobs. The big three had gone down, and I found the same kind of thing, that people found a sense of meaning by able to do urban farming in a place like Detroit, right? And it makes a real difference. It is a sharing kind of economy. People would barter. I don't know if I should say that. Can I go to prison for bartering? But people would barter because money was so scarce. So they would trade and found a way to sustain themselves, to sustain a community in real economic tragedy. Sharon, did you want to?
Well, yeah, I was wondering, because are there in Columbia along those lines, community gardens and urban agriculture? I mean, that's so important. And in different cities, they have things, mutual aid societies, where it is bartering.
Have that too.
Where unlike you share whatever you can offer, and so it's working outside the money economy.
Absolutely. So. From Angie says Missouri OEO does have a list of minority and women-owned businesses. And if you check your chat, you will see the link. Angie has provided us with a link for that. So thank you, Angie. Scott, you have a question about scale. Scott?
Got to unmute. There we go. I think I'm unmuted now. There we go. Yeah, I find this fascinating. My little thing that I do is music. Also used to drive Uber, but not now. And I'm big on sharing it. Somebody comes along and wants to sit in. I want to share. So it's like I want to. If we get $5, I'm going to break a dollar bill and give them $2.50. What I'm saying. But anyway, so my question is about scale. I also live in this neighborhood, 4 or 5 houses that we really build relationship, and we do share, but we don't share income. Anyway, how does this transfer? I mean, I'm all about relationship and community. I was reading today, somebody says that there's no, how do you have a community if people aren't essential to one another? So how big can a community be? So my question, I'm sorry, I'm keep going, but how big can one of these B corporations be? How does that work? That's all.
I'm so glad you asked that, Scott, because one of the things I want to, go back to what I said before is, two things that I referred to is that the B corporation people, they don't see themselves as just being something on the edge. They want to completely replace capitalism. Mm-hmm. That all businesses operate in this model. And then as an example, and I was just kind of looking for it and I can't find it here, but for example, some of you might know about and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, the Mondragon Cooperative in Spain, mm-hmm. which has like over 100,000 employees and operates on this. And
I read that.
Yeah. And so there really is an idea that this can become the new norm. One of the other people that and a thing that gives me hope that it can be, and this is how things have evolved since 2019. It was interesting. One of the people that I interview in the book, Craig Sieben, Sieben Energy Associates. He's also Unitarian Universalist. Now, everybody that I interviewed in the book didn't have to be Unitarian Universalist, but it didn't hurt, right? I kind of did my bit. It was subtle with Tony and Craig. And then this gets into your issue, Scott, of scale. So what I loved about interviewing Craig is I can't remember what really liberal school that he went to in Massachusetts or something, but as an undergraduate. And he was really involved in being critical of nuclear power. And one of the people at the school, his professor, said, well, you're critical about nuclear power, but what do you think we should do instead? It's not just enough to protest. What should you do? And so he really became focused on renewable energy and finding out different ways that can work. And he does things now like for the Field Museum, the big museum in Chicago, the University of Chicago Children's Hospital. He has things in Detroit. He's got them in San Diego. And one of the things that was so fascinating is that this thing of wanting to do renewable energy, things that are sustainable over the long haul, and talking about scale, where that's the new norm, that did not stop after the 2016 election in 2019. And even in 2019, we found there's been even more of a push for renewable energy than there was before. And so people taking the chance of, we have to do things in a different way. And we're going to create, and this is a way really of, not only is it good for the environment, it creates more jobs. And so things are really being pushed. And so he found like his business has just been expanding where he's created it, and the name of the business has changed even. It's grown exponentially. But again, a kind of fascinating thing. This is
Sharon, what was the name of that
wanting to do the right thing. I beg your pardon?
Todd.
What was the name of that business again?
Oh, somebody had a question.
It was Sieben Energy Associates, Craig Sieben, S-I-E-B-E-N, and I'll have to look up what the new company is that he works with now. It's the name has changed.
Okay. Todd, did you have a question?
And I did have a question. Something you said early on, Sharon, really stuck in my mind, and it was about why B corporations came about. And it's because, regular corporations have to put shareholders' interest first, otherwise they'll get sued. So right. My question, I'm a lawyer by training, so I come from a perspective of the law says that now, but it didn't always say that. Really, the neoliberal economic of capitalism is really only about 75 years old, and that's really where the shareholder came first. So where does we have a legal system in the United States that really encourages rent seeking by capitalists. So where does changing that structure fit in with the cultural changes that you're talking about?
I mean, I'm glad you asked that, Todd. And this is someone else that I interviewed in the book, Mark Lane, who works. He's also an attorney, and he works here in Chicago. And literally, he's not just written the book; he's written like 30 books on the legal structures now and what it means to be a B corporation, a limited liability, 3C, and how to work with the legal. Also, one of the things that we're working on in Illinois is that we don't have good laws in Illinois. It's really hard for there to be worker-owned cooperatives, and trying to make that possible because there are so many small businesses kind of especially in the industry field that were like family owned, and the family doesn't want to own them. And so to create the structure so that the workers could, but we don't have good laws in Illinois for that to happen. And so that's one of the things that's so important is to create and make that.
Could I ask a follow-up question, Sharon?
Mm-hmm.
In the chapter, one thing you talk about, but we haven't talked about tonight yet, is I think they're called L3C enterprises. It's a particular legal form in which is specifically specified that maximizing profit is not the purpose, and there's some other purpose. I was trying to find out if that was a possibility in the Missouri books, and apparently in 2009 there was legislation introduced, but I couldn't track down whatever happened to it. And it seems like there's only a few states that have that, but I think Illinois is one of them. Yeah. Could you give your take on what the potential is for that form of enterprise to be significant and to find its footing in all 50 states?
Well, that's one of the goals of the Social Enterprise Alliance that I'm part of, and Mark Lane is one of the leaders.
Yeah.
And so it's trying to make that possible, and so that people don't have to get incorporated in, I don't know, what's one of the states that can do it, but so that it can really be done, and so that there is a real push of trying to get that state by state.
And you see any potential for co-op farms as opposed to the L3C farm? Co-op farms is sort of a different legal structure, I guess.
Well, and again, that's state by state, and it's really interesting because when you this is one of the things I loved in really getting into this work is I discovered in working with Mark Lane and others, and this was a point that was made by J.K. Gibson Graham, like creating this kind of economy. It's hard even for workers. It's not just this sense of moral purity of trying to make it happen. It's hard to run a co-op well. And really state by state, you have to look and see if you've got the laws for it. So like in Illinois, we've got the LLC3, but we don't have the co-op. Missouri might have the co-op. I don't know.
Well, yeah, actually Missouri has a co-op incorporation that was created in the mid 80s. But how much potential? I don't. There is. Yeah. It's possible to create a consumer co-op in Missouri, which it wasn't before about 1984. But whether that that's on the books, but whether it's been taken advantage of is hard. Is another question.
Is Boone Electric one of those that operate under a cooperative agreement that you're talking about, or not?
Well, it was around before this legislate. Boone Electric was part of this. There was an organization called Missouri Association for Community Cooperation that existed in Missouri from about 1980 through 1985 or so. Then it kind of petered away. But one of its goals was to cooperate with the old-time farm co-ops and electric co-ops to modify the corporate incorporation law so that consumer co-ops could be formed. And That's about as much as I know about it, because I kind of lost track of what was going on with it after 1985. But I know it is there. You can find it in the Missouri statutes.
One of the things I wanted to let you know, I just looked up in terms of, Craig Sieben and what he works for now. And again, I'm not 100% sure how to pronounce it. It's AECOM, AECOM. He joined forces with, it's a Fortune 500 company. It's global, that does renewable energy globally. And their revenue in 2018 was $20.2 billion.
Sure.
So talk about scale.
Yeah.
They're moving it up.
Jan sent to us on chat, I really like Sanchez's checking tendencies to repeat patterns of environmental degradation through specific rituals, like our own personal beauty way. Also liked this list of 7 weaknesses of white liberals, especially fighting over strategies and tactics, our purity tests, and our inherent belief in linear progress, which undermines us in 2 ways. We think we can never fall back, and we get discouraged when the road forward is not straight. Agreed. Anyone want to speak to that? Thank you, Jan. Thank you very much.
And I encourage all of you with those. That was a thing that I loved teaching with Carol Lee Sanchez, because, and again, there was this thing of like, she taught us in our classes, like the basic principles of the beauty way. Mm-hmm. So to ground yourself in the beauty walk and be aware, but she wouldn't teach us the particular rituals that come from the Laguna Pueblo.
Okay.
Like you needed to come up with your own. And like the thing that I did with coming up with those 7 Wendigos,
right.
I was thinking, well, those are white people's Wendigos. I mean, that's not it. I mean, that might be some other people, but it's kind of, we need to have that particularity.
Right.
The own ways that we fall short, and to have this kind of trickster mindset of we call ourselves back into community and reciprocity, and do it in a way where it's not this kind of purity denouncing, thinking that somehow we're going to be perfect and we'll build a land and it's all right. Mm-mm. No, these tendencies continue. And how do we build the kind of community that we can work together to contain our worst and nurture our best?
Right.
Yeah, I can speak to that as a former competitive feminist. Reforming, but I'm not over it yet, but I'm still very undermining of the whole project by being a competitive feminist. Yeah, so.
Very good.
That's my evil. Indigo.
Well, what a wonderful night. Any final questions or comments? Sharon, thank you so much for spending time with us and just allowing us to reflect and think about ways in which we can be in community with one another. Pac, thank you. Hannah, thanks so much. And to all of you, thank you for being here. Next Tuesday now, we will have Dr. Rodriguez. He will be with us, William Rodriguez, out of Florida. He comes from the Lutheran tradition, so y'all be nice to him. And he's going to talk more about global capitalism and how that affects us. So that will be a very interesting discussion. Again, invite people to participate in these discussions. Hint, hint. They tell me I've held back from you all a little bit, so I'm not going to hold back on this one. You know what you use? Y'all need to invite other people to come to the stuff that you like. My mama used to say, it's a poor dog that don't wag its own tail. You need to let folks know that if it's good and it's exciting to you, it will be probably exciting to other folk, which then helps to increase the knowledge of who you are as you use, which may increase your work by having more people join the fellowship. Lord, I wish I had a witness somewhere in here. That it will help us. It will help you. So invite other people to come on and be part of this discussion. Fascinating. Sharon, again, thank you. Pat, thank you. Hannah, and to all of you, thank you so much for what you have done. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Everybody, good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye.